In this session, we're going to talk about data-driven decision-making and response to intervention. Response to intervention is often abbreviated as RTI. My hunch is that many of you have heard of RTI in your schools. If you have not, you very likely will in the very near future. It is often referred to as response to intervention, as indicated here on the screen, but it's also referred to as response to instruction. You hear both of those phrases associated with RTI. To get a big picture of how this fits in the world of education and instruction and assessment, let's take a big picture understanding of the art and the science of teaching. As you know, education includes both an artistic side and a scientific side. For many years, teaching has embraced more fully this world of the artistic side. Many people have gone into education. My hunch is that you probably chose to go into the field of education because of the artistic side, that creativity of developing the perfect strategy to help a student understand that given objective, that given content that you want them to walk away with understanding. But it's also building relationships with students. It's about demonstrating your level of care and love for the students that you have. And so all of those represent the artistic side of education. And for the longest time, that has really been the crux of what education is all about. In more recent years, we have begun to see more of a push toward the scientific side of education, really looking at data to drive and to decide the way in which we as educators are to move forward. My hunch is that many of you live and breathe in this world of data, and that the data are being used in a way to inform your instruction and to be able to determine who is understanding information and who is not understanding information, and to provide an opportunity for you to reteach that which is not comprehended. And so it is that scientific side of education that we're seeing more fully now, but we do realize that education includes both an artistic and a scientific side. I emphasize that we realize that, but there's a lot of people in the court of public opinion who do not fully embrace that, and there's many political leaders who do not fully understand that. They look at this from kind of the business perspective of the bottom line, and they say, well, this really is about the numbers, and we want to see Johnny and Susie and every other student in your class receive these certain scores and these benchmarks of indicators. And if you don't receive those, it means that they're not able to move forward. But it's also been translated to the point that you as a teacher are no longer effective because they're not reaching those given milestones or those given benchmarks. Let me tell you that I don't really believe and ascribe to that idea. I believe that there is evidence to the fact that as educators we really do understand that there is value in building relationships with students, and that you as educators are professionals, and that you should have some level of professional judgment in knowing who is understanding, and that it should not be this world of accusation against you for the fact that you are not necessarily demonstrating academic gains for some students. We realize that there are other related factors that make up a person's life and a person's education. And unfortunate to the world of quantitative numbers, it's not true that we can really just always quantify everything to the way that we could perhaps in the business world. Nevertheless, I'm on a little bit of a soapbox here, but let me move forward here as we move into this world of the scientific side of education and that of RTI. As we talked about previously in this course, there are two different types of assessment. There's the idea of formative assessment and summative assessment. Obviously, there are other forms of assessment as well, but these are the two broad areas that we want to focus on right now. We realize as well that formative assessment is assessment that is intended to inform or guide your instruction and your future instruction, to be able to identify those students who are not understanding the related content so that you can go back and reteach it to those who need additional assistance. Summative assessment is that summary of understanding. It is conclusive. It's the end result. I think about that in terms of a final exam as being very summative in form. But it is this formative world of assessment where RTI perhaps fits in most appropriately. We realize as well that in educational policy, policies have changed over time, but for the past decade or so, No Child Left Behind has kind of been the driving force behind this idea of data-driven decision-making. And I'll say that as the administrations changed from the Bush administration to the Obama administration, we thought that we might see some change in academic policies as well. But quite frankly, the policies of Race to the Top have been very similar, if not even more so, behind this idea of data-driven decision-making. And so I raise this point to say it's really both sides of the political aisle that are embracing this idea that schools need to reform and that the work of teachers is not effective. And I don't necessarily agree to that idea. It's my personal judgment on that, but if we begin to look at some of the other related data on how schools are actually performing, I think we can see otherwise. If we look at the NAEP exams, for example, we see that there are gains over time in reading, for example. Diane Ravitch is one who has written an excellent book on this idea, and it's a book that I think all of us should be encountering in this world of education, to be able to stand up to say that it is not just about the scientific side, it is not just about the data, and that there actually is, or there are data to provide some level of evidence for what is working. But it is a combination of these types of policies along with special education policy, such as we see here, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act. These policies are basically saying we need to make sure that every student in a classroom is receiving and is working in that least restrictive environment. Ideally, we want students to be in the mainstream classroom, but it may be that they need to be pulled out of that classroom and they need additional support or additional resources. If that is the case, then we need to make sure we're identifying precisely who should be called for and who should be pulled out of that classroom to receive those special needs services. And so that's the idea of these related policies that kind of worked up to where we're getting in the world of response to intervention. And so as we look at this related policy, there are policies behind this policy that also support this idea. But it is that least restrictive environment. It is about mainstreaming, as I was previously indicating. But both of these policies kind of joined forces to say that it is about accountability testing for all students, that it's about scientifically based instruction, about reading achievement for all students, and about this thing called progress monitoring. Now, progress monitoring, let's just indicate more clearly what that actually is. I think about that as simply a quiz. It's basically all we're aiming to do is to assess and to determine what do our students actually know. It's a method of formative assessment, is it not? We're monitoring their progress as we teach. This is where we come into the world of response to intervention, better known as RTI. RTI is really this tiered approach, T-I-E-R-E-D, tiered system that is really aimed at bringing together this world of assessment, of instruction, and of using data to make informed decisions. But it does apply to the regular classroom as well as the special education classroom and to the needs of all of these students. But it primarily focuses on this idea of continually monitoring how well students know and understand the information and the content that is being presented to them. It's really about a learning probe. It's about progress monitoring. We see here these curriculum-based measures. That's another fancy term to say we're using a learning probe. We're using a formative assessment. We're using a quiz, right, to be able to really determine what our students know and can do. Now, I use that more generally, but keeping in mind that there are other methods of assessment that could be used other than traditional quizzes or tests, and they really should be used. My hunch is that many of you are implementing such strategies as well. But nevertheless, as we move forward here, we see that RTI brought forth this change in the world of education, moving away from that artistic side of education more to that scientific approach, saying it is data that needs to really drive where we're moving and how we're progressing in the world of education. But as we look at this, it is saying as well that we need to put more focus on formative assessment as opposed to just this end-of-year evaluation of a summative assessment. It makes sense, does it not? We need to be able to gauge what our students know and can do and whether or not they're fully understanding. And so it focuses on bringing together this world of assessment, of instruction, and of related decision making. For example, when I say that word, or the words of decision making, primarily what we're aiming to do is to get our mind around who should we be referring to special education services, for example. Who should be moving forward in this course? Who needs some additional remediation? And so that's really what we're aiming to do as we talk about using data to make informed decisions. Now, the RTI approach, different schools, different districts have different ways in which they approach this idea of response to intervention. But kind of as a basic general pattern, it follows what we see here on the screen. At the very foundational level, we see this Tier 1 approach. We're basically saying there is a primary intervention, and that is whole class instruction, for example. So we're saying that 80% of students will actually understand and comprehend what is being taught that first time around. Now, I use the word receive here, but let me clarify that that's really about comprehension, about understanding. And so what we can also indicate with this is that the first time you teach something in class, there's a very good chance that 20% of your students will not understand what you have just taught. And so that's where we move on to the second tiers. We see Tier 2 and Tier 3 indicating here the summation of both that 15 and 5%. But if we say here that in that second tier, 15% of the students are then understanding what is taught through that remediation. So you're teaching it again, and of those 20% of students, only 15% will actually understand and comprehend what is being understood or what is being taught. And so, as you see here, this often occurs through more individualized instruction, through perhaps small group instruction, and it's occurring perhaps over a time span of 8 to 12 weeks. Then we move down here to Tier 3, and we realize that there's approximately 5% of students who are receiving Tier 3 instruction. And students who are not understanding through additional remediation are then referred to through special education services. Now, the whole idea behind this, or one of the main ideas, aside from the benefit of progress monitoring, beside the idea of formative assessment, is the idea that we are really referring students to special education services who really need that related assistance. And so there's a benefit there in the fact that we are not just referring students who are the troublemakers in our classes to special education services and backlogging the world of special education services with students who really should not be there and preventing those students who need that additional help from getting it. And so it's kind of the logic here of a funnel down approach that we see as a part of RTI.